Good evening, everyone. This is Dr. Francois du Toit. I'm joined this evening by Dr. Faryal Luhar, and this is part 2 in the diabetes webinar series. Thank you for joining us. Do let us know how the video and sound quality is on a scale of 5, and we'd really appreciate it if you could stop the video sharing and mute yourselves so that we can have all the recording on of course, the slides and the presentations we're doing. We're streaming live to Facebook. If you'd like to follow it there on my page, Dr. Francois du Toit on Facebook. And we will be also making this recording available later on a few platforms on YouTube. Dr. Faryal Luhar will also be sharing this on YouTube later. But thank you everyone for putting aside your Saturday evening to join us. And of course, in the mid of the day in the Middle East, we really appreciate everyone. And yeah, I'll hand it off to you, Dr. Luhar.
Yes, definitely happy to be here today and to spend part of my Saturday with everyone. So thank you so much for making the time. Really appreciate it. And I hope that today's webinar is going to be very packed with lots of amazing information, and hopefully everyone will really enjoy it. We'd love your feedback. So please feel free to send us your comments.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Dr. Luhar. So we are on time, and I think everyone in the waiting room has been admitted. And I see the messages coming in to let us know that the sound and video is fine. Thank you, Sumi. I appreciate hearing that. That's very good. Just a few more people coming in from the waiting room. But yes, we're good to start. So I'll be sharing my screen to start our presentation for today.
So maybe today we can just give you a quick heads up that we are doing part 2 of the webinar that we started last Saturday, which was part 1. If you missed part 1, please don't worry, don't fret. You'll be able to catch that on YouTube on both of our platforms. So you can just look for our names. So today we'll be building on part 2. We're going to be discussing some new concepts and some more interesting, taking a deeper dive into the whole issue regarding insulin resistance and all of its different manifestations. So hope you guys are all pumped up.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Dr. Luhar, I see there's a person in the iPhone and he's in the waiting room. Perfect.
Okay.
The person just wanting to join. Perfect. Okay, I've admitted them. Yes, so this is part 2 in the diabetes webinar series. Both me and Dr. Luhar are naturopathic doctors. I am here in South Africa, in a town called George on lockdown, and Dr. Luhar is of course in Canada, where she studied to become a naturopath, which gives me a tremendous, which is an honor to actually have on a webinar like this, because if you understand international naturopathy, the Canadian naturopaths are top of the class, top of the world.
Oh, that's very, very kind. Likewise, feel the same about you.
I was honored to work 2 years in Thailand at an international wellness retreat and spa. And we were fortunate to I was working as part of a team of naturopaths from all over the world, a Canadian naturopath, an Australian naturopath. And I was honored to call them my colleagues. And we were sharing and training together, and it was wonderful. It really brought my experience of naturopathy to a whole different level. Because if my South African audience will be sometimes less familiar with the term naturopathy or naturopathic doctors. Here it seems to be more confused with homeopathy or homeopathic doctors.
Correct.
But that's perfectly fine as a reference, because if it wasn't for homeopaths, I wouldn't be where I am today. Cured me when I was young. But yeah, let's start sharing the slides and we can actually start. Here we go. So thank you everyone for hiding your videos. I can see that, and that'll be perfect because we are recording this session and we'll be uploading it later. So to start off, I will be discussing cholesterol, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Of course, a little bit of a steal there from a popular movie name. And I will be focusing on how fats affect our blood sugar levels. So I will be discussing what drew me to study further into the science of cholesterol, and also what drew me to the concept of LCHF, also called low carbohydrate, high fat. At least when it started, it was mentioned that name, but now it's changed in the last few years to low carbohydrate, healthy fat, which is an exceptional change because the confusion has been for a long, long amount of time, of course, what is a healthy fat and what is an unhealthy fat? And of course, there is a very big difference. And how the whole Banting diet, which is a LCHF for a low carb, high fat diet, revolutionized the thinking of all South Africans. And then secondly, I'll be delving into how man-made food has really caused the epidemic we're seeing of diabetes in the world, as well as the science of the food industry, especially when it comes to the science of food addiction, because I can tell you food addiction is a science. It's down to a T how they manipulate foods to make them taste amazing and make you want to come back for more. And then thirdly, I'll be delving into the deeper science of cholesterol, how to check for healthy cholesterol levels, how it influences the health of our bodies, the dark history of cholesterol, and really what is a good and a bad cholesterol. So Dr. Luhar, I think there might be more people in the waiting room trying to join. I see some hands being raised.
Okay, let me have a look here.
Maybe they just have some questions. But thank you for letting us know that you have a concern. We'll be jumping between myself and Dr. Luhar to answer your questions or resolve concerns if you can't hear us or see us. So do please be patient on that side. Okay, so that's looking fine. Just going to continue there. Okay. So just a brief background. In my previous discussion, I mentioned that the reason why I became a naturopath is because of I was really exposed to this field of medicine because I was very sick growing up. And one of the things that I wanted to highlight for this discussion is that if it wasn't for the really my mother's courage to step outside of the box of conventional medicine, I wouldn't be where I was today. So one of the things that I commend is that in the world we find that it's mostly women that are health conscious. I myself tend to see 9 out of 10 women as my patients, and I of course encourage all men to come and see me. But it's the natural inclination to be aware of the family self, the children's self, and take control. But also I find that even with women, with the ladies, it is not always easy to embrace change or to embrace a lot of these topics that might seem even controversial. And this topic about cholesterol is very controversial. So you'll find a lot of things. And one of the things that happens is that a lot of the things on the internet are 50-50. 50% says cholesterol is good, 50% cholesterol is bad. And there is a lot of influences that promote a certain way of saying or thinking, even boasting that this is scientifically proven. Where there is a shred of science which is blown out of proportion to prove a point, what we call scientific bias. So just to give you a little bit of a brief in terms of what we're discussing, to open up your minds to a new way of thinking, open up to new scientific principles, because I can also honestly guarantee you that everything I'm mentioning today has got an exceptional solid body of scientific evidence to prove it. So how I was introduced to this whole low carbohydrate, high fat diet was because of the co-author of the Real Meal Revolution, Dr. Sally Ann Creed. There was the 4 co-authors of the Banting Revolution, of course, Professor Tim Noakes, everyone knows, and then Dr. Sally Ann Creed as the nutritionist of the team. So she's a nutritional therapist. In fact, most of the nutrition knowledge in the book was based on her personal experiences recovering and basically a life-saving dietary approach that helped her recover from a serious health condition. And we had a wonderful book signing event in George, a massive event at CrossFit. We had 160 people. And of course, she signed my book and my practice. That's the photo. And I'm very honored to call her a friend and a colleague as well. And it was really thanks to her that I delved into the science of cholesterol and the benefits of low carbohydrate, high fat diets. But in fact, one of the main things that I've learned along the way is there is no one size fits all diet, but there's a principle that helps here. So you'll see on the screen one of the benefits that I especially gained from following this dietary approach. This was 2013 when I started my practice. was that I lost up to 7 kilograms in weight and my running performance peaked. This was me at the Two Oceans Marathon. My dad also did exceptionally well on the diet. He lost a lot of weight, 10 kilograms, in fact, in a period of 6 months. And then also his blood pressure stabilized, which he had been struggling with for years, from 150 over 100 to perfectly normal, what we call perfectly stable blood pressure of 120 over 80. So that was really fantastic. And then I also had this tremendous success within that period of time where a male patient came to see me. I think he was in his late 40s. His blood sugar levels, actually, Dr. Luhar, my figures of last week was incorrect. I said his blood sugar levels was 17. It's sometimes because of the average of his HbA1c was up to 26.
Wow, that's crazy.
He should have been dead. Yes. And I told him, you have to either go see your doctor and be put on medication to lower your insulin or your blood sugar right now because you might die. And at the same time, ideally following this diet very strictly, and we follow this by the book. But he didn't want to see a doctor himself personally. I told him, if you don't follow this diet to the T as strictly as I say, I take no responsibility what happens next. But the good news was in 1 month, his blood sugar levels completely stabilized to an average of 6, his glucose, average of 6 from this 17 to 28 figure. So this was a wonderful response on the low carbohydrate, high fat diet. And of course, I wouldn't say that it's necessarily a typical result. Everyone's body's genetics are different, but for him, it was, in fact, a lifesaver, and he was cured of diabetes type 2.
That's remarkable. Fantastic.
So this is now more than, well, a few years ago, but on everyone's lips, of course, has been Professor Tim Noakes because of spearheading the whole banting revolution and, of course, bringing out the book, The Real Me Revolution. And one of the things that I wanted to highlight to people why I'm bringing up this particular slide is that he really has been the voice of the people that were aware of how there are dangers of carbohydrates. There's dangers in high sugar, high fructose foods. And of course, there's a lot of tremendous benefits in having healthy fats in your diet. And he had to change his opinion because he was an advocate of high carbohydrate diets. He wrote a book called The Law of Running, which in most runners, it's the Bible of running. It's like the manual you go to understand the whole physiology, because he's also a sports scientist, except for being a scientific and medical doctor professor. And he was actually taken to court because of his opinion, specifically a tweet on Twitter, where he mentioned for a breastfeeding mom that was breastfeeding to wean a baby onto a low carbohydrate, high fat diet. This was back in 2014. So after the years that followed, which was a hectic court battle, they won that first case, which was then appealed and went back into court. And then at the end of a grueling 4 years, he was acquitted. He was found not guilty on all 10 charges, which was in fact an exceptional win to the science of low carbohydrate, healthy fat eating. And I'm really very honored to have been in the circle of communication of the founders of the Real Revolution to gain these insights and this particular victory.
I think just for our viewers who are not South African, the banting diet, I believe you will be more familiar with it being called the ketogenic diet in some ways, because it is your high fat, low carb. And we'll discuss that a bit more because as I mentioned in our last webinar, you know, a lot of people with the popular craze of doing ketogenic diets were not necessarily consuming the right fats, and that's important.
Yes, that's very correct. So this is a revolution that started in South Africa, but it really did kind of blow out to the rest of the world to bring awareness about the benefits of a low carbohydrate, high fat diet. But that's also why even the acronym changed. So it was LCHF for low carb, high fat. Now it's changed to low carbohydrate, healthy fat, which I think even if you read the books and the articles that are coming up now, you'd notice that, or at least we discerning viewers or readers would notice that, and we understand why. Because one of the biggest problems was that people were thinking that all fats are healthy and they eat as much as they can, they'll be fine, which is of course not the case. That's the problem with diets. The focus should never be on a diet, it should be on the nutritional value of the food you're eating. And certain fats have got more nutritional value than others. So when we look at what happened to our food, most of what we're talking about in terms of what makes us sick in modern life is because of the processed food industry, which came with the Industrial Revolution, where we took the same mindset of, wow, we can actually manufacture a car by putting bits and pieces together in this really perfect system for making equipment and cars and electronic devices very quickly by assigning one person one small role, and that's what they do. And we took the same process and we took that over to the food industry, which is the biggest mistake of the 21st century. Of course, I think it would almost in human history when it comes to nutrition, because as a consequence of the processed food industry, you lose nutritional value because there's high temperatures involved, there's preservatives involved. Dr. Law, you're welcome to jump in here and let me know what you know about that side of things. There's so much.
Well, I was just thinking, looking at all of those, looking at all of these delicious junk foods, what's wrong with that, right? What's wrong with eating all this stuff? I mean, it looks really tempting and delicious. Who doesn't want to enjoy that? But as you said, food is not just about calories and fuel. It's actually information, right? There's a big difference between having a handful of almonds or a handful of grapes and a handful of M&Ms. There's a big difference with what that's telling the body. So what we're seeing here with this beautiful picture that you have is what a lot of experts have called frankenfoods, right? Which is basically foods that have been made somewhere in a lab that is not real.
And they're not alive. You can put foods like this under a Kirlian photograph or Kirlian photography, and you will see that this food has got no electromagnetic field. It's completely dead. And you take a Kirlian photograph of an apple, you see the sparks and the energy flying off. So except for nutritional value, there's no energy in that food. That's completely dead.
Right. Yeah, great point.
And then the bliss point. So one of the things that came out with especially the knowledge that Professor Tim Noakes brought to the public was this subject about the bliss point. So when they started when the food industry started taking control of manufacturing food, they came to this perfect ratio of fats to salt to sugar. When in this perfect ratio, when you consume it, a good example would be one of these potato crisps or chip. When you eat it, it's like it melts in your mouth, wonderful taste, and then it's gone like that. And you're left with a feeling of, did I even eat anything? Did I even put a chip in my mouth? Oh, wait, I should have the next one. You pop the next one in your mouth. And of course, the same thing repeats, and this is the cycle. It gives you the brain, it fools the brain in thinking that it was amazing and it satisfied you. But because they've scientifically played with this ratio of the sugar, the oil, and the fat, they have made, or the oil, they've made it that it is exceptionally addictive, but with leaving no permanence in the body. That's why you keep coming back for more. I keep telling people, you don't eat because you're hungry. You eat because you're looking for nutrition. And if you eat food that's nutritionally dense, you can get by with very, very little food. You can almost have one meal a day, and there's many advocates of one meal a day diets these days I see on YouTube, which can be healthy if the food is nutritious. You can get by with one meal a day, but it all depends on what's in your local environment. Is there nutritious local food? And then maybe that could be an option. But you eat because you're looking for nutritional value. Now, when we talk about the opposite of what I was mentioning in the beginning, high carb, low fat, which of course was the whole way the food industry went because of the fear of fat and the fear of cholesterol, we find that food is high in sugar and has almost no nutritional value. So this is why it destroyed the value of what could have been very nutritious food. And then when you mix in the whole genetically modified organism or GMO industry, which was necessary to produce crops on a larger scale to make it resistant from spraying, you've added a lot of pesticides to this mix. So the food became, GMO foods is another good example of frankenfoods, because it's also, it's complete, now it's genetically modified. Now you can't find it in nature. So you actually find food toxins in these plants. It's really horrendous what they've done to nature. It's something that should have never happened, but we in retrospect are fighting back, and people are going only for organic non-GMO, heirloom seed foods. So yeah, I won't go into more than that. It's a very long and sad story. So agriculture went this way of farming that has been focusing on genetically modified organisms and heavily spraying their crops. Whereas on the opposite side, we are advocating organic food. And you can have organic food and even organic farming methods that produces food in abundance. The whole argument that you can only provide food for a large amount of people or for the world with conventional farming methods is a complete lie. It will take many, many years, or even a decade maybe, to make the shift. But when you farm with methods that are organic, especially the back to Eden farming method that I've mentioned to my audience in my lockdown learning series, you produce 10 times the same amount of crop on a piece of land that even the agriculture system can, because you are protecting the soil. And it builds from year to year. From year 1 to year 2, you have a doubling in your produce. From year 2 to 3, you have a fourfold increase in your produce. And this increases because of the way that nature has been designed to produce its own health and nutritional value in the soil when you're doing things without using toxic chemicals. And this is actually a topic that Dr. Luhar mentioned last week really well. Maybe you should repeat that. One of your patients or a colleague mentioned to you about what is really real food.
Yeah, so I mean, interestingly, there's no such thing as junk food, right? It's either junk or it's food. That's
Yes.
basically it.
Yes, yes. And I've been looking for that marshmallow on a tree, to be honest.
Haven't we all? Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the taste. So you look at this food in the packaging, and you say, like, could I have picked this up in nature? Could I have picked this off the tree? And of course, if it doesn't pass that litmus test for being real food, it's best to stay away. So this is something that many people are faced with now, realizing that there are healthy fats.
Very cute.
And we all need affirmations these days, especially what's happening in the world, to stay positive. And luckily, one of them is you can rely on certain healthy fats. So what was really wonderful for me was to see this Times magazine front cover article. For a lot of people, they want to hit their heads against the wall, because it was one of those scenarios where something that was exceptionally bad for a long time made a complete 180-degree turn. And unfortunately, this is what the internet does and what the mainstream media does. They enjoy flipping people from one end to the next because of it's sensational. And they also actually leave the public with pulling their hair out thinking, what should I eat? I'll leave everything. I'll leave all fat. I'll leave all cholesterol. I'll leave even this diet because it's changed again. But unfortunately, there are certain truths. And this is likely the shift towards the truth. Is that the scientists labeled fat the enemy, and they were wrong. They've always been wrong. And even the original...
I think part of this is also related... Sorry to interject, but I was just going to say, and you're probably going to cover it, the whole misconception about the way we understand cholesterol and how we've made it the culprit comes from Ansel Keys.
Yes.
Right? Who was one of the first people who decided how cholesterol should be perceived, and that, fat is bad.
It's 100% true. Dr. Ansel Keys, he cemented in what we call the cholesterol heart disease hypothesis. And I say that hypothesis very purposefully because it's an unproven theory. It's never been proven. And in fact, there's a lot more science to prove that cholesterol does not cause heart disease. And this quote, in terms of blaming cholesterol for causing heart disease, like blaming firemen for causing fires, just because they are found at the scene of the crime does not mean they are the culprits. And that was actually a section in an interview, investigative journal series of videos in the Australian news network called ABC Catalyst, and that's called Heart of the Matter. But unfortunately, if you try to find that online, you'll find it's been removed because of the pressure from industry. But you can still find the video in certain spaces, and I will provide the video for anyone that contacts me, because I think it's one of the best summaries in terms of the truth about cholesterol science and this whole topic. And in terms of what you'll find, because people ask, if I consume a lot of cholesterol, what will happen to my blood figures? What will happen to my health? Now, when you consume healthy cholesterol and when you cut out sugars and bad carbohydrates, I'll go into that in a bit more detail, you'll find that your what was considered the healthy cholesterol, the HDL, goes up. What's considered the bad cholesterol, and I'm saying this in parentheses because none of them are good or bad, but you'll find that the LDL goes down in some people. Some people, especially women, they might find actually the LDL goes up initially. But that's not a bad thing, as I will explain even more when I will be playing a short video that explains it a little bit better. But you'll find that both have got essential role to fulfill. And if you need LDL in your body in certain times to support you, for example, if you get a cut, your body would automatically recruit more LDL to send it to that wound to heal and repair that broken piece of skin. I see someone, I think, in the waiting room that was trying to join us. Could you just
Let me see if I can let them in. I
Thank you
don't
so
see
much.
anyone.
Okay, let me quickly jump back there. Let's see. Oh, it's just a chat coming through. Good, good. And so yes, you'll find that many of the factors improve. Triglycerides go down. Your highly sensitive CRP or inflammation marker for the heart goes down. Uric acid goes down. The blood sugar marker HbA1c would decrease, insulin also, as well as blood glucose, and even, of course, the waist circumference. So let me play a short video just to give you the science of the cholesterol heart disease myth, and as well as introducing you to a cardiologist.
Cholesterol is a waxy substance that doesn't dissolve in the blood, so it has to be carried around by proteins, mainly LDL and HDL. LDL is said to deliver cholesterol to the tissues, hence it's bad, and HDL is said to remove cholesterol from plants, hence it's good.
Small needles are good.
But when Dr. Sinatra has his annual blood test, he says he's not that concerned about cholesterol. What about the bad cholesterol?
You call it the LDL, bad cholesterol? Well, you know, I don't really call it bad unless it's oxidized. Remember, if it's oxidized, then it's inflammatory.
So cholesterol's not bad only if it's oxidized.
Exactly. If the cholesterol is oxidized, if there's free radical stress involved and it's oxidized, that's inflammatory, and that sets a cascade for inflammation. Well, the inflammatory theory of heart disease, I think, is accepted more and more now. I think the general cardiovascular community is still focusing on cholesterol. They need to focus more on inflammation. And that's where, you know, emotional stress, but sugar is really the foe when it comes to cardiovascular disease. You see, we placed all this emphasis on cholesterol, we've taken it off sugar. And that's the problem. Then you're getting more insulin responses. And we know that insulin is the #1 indicator for inducing what we call inflammation of blood vessels.
So there we go. So
That's a great video, and it highlights the major underlying driver of everything we're talking about, which is inflammation, and then of course sugar. Exactly,
yes. And it was really a wonderful introduction to the whole science of cholesterol and heart disease. From that was also the Heart of the Matter documentary series. So you'll find that these slides are blank. I will be leaving this for part 3. So these are how to make healthy food choices and what are safe and unsafe choices. So this is a bit of a teaser for everyone, but I want to leave time for Dr. Luhar, so I've taken these out, as well as introducing you to what we now consider to be the unhealthy food pyramid that was instituted in America in 1992. As well as what I would call a holistic food pyramid, which we will discuss in next week. So over to you, Dr. Luhar.
Thank you so much. And I think I might end up having, not stolen, but overlapping a little bit with some of your stuff. But that's great because it shows, right, that we're thinking along the same lines. Great minds think alike. And the fact that these are important concepts across the board for naturopathic doctors. So we're just going to shift gears a little bit. Thank you so much for all of that amazing information about just the history, what I would call the brutal history of how we came to make cholesterol and fats the enemy, and now we have to change our thinking because they're actually not the enemy. If anything, they're going to save us from so many chronic conditions. So At the bottom of all of this is insulin resistance, which I spent a lot of time with you at our first webinar discussing what is insulin resistance. So again, for those of you who missed that, please check out the YouTube video. It's uploaded on there. Part 2 today, I'm going to be just taking it further. We're going to take a deeper dive. We're going to talk about other concepts related to insulin resistance, diabesity, and we're going to talk a lot about inflammation. If you want to get in touch with me, this is how you can get in touch with me. And as I said, we're going to also spend some time discussing the role of inflammation, because this is the major underlying driver for all chronic diseases, but in particular for insulin resistance, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and so on. I'm going to introduce you to the concept of AGEs, AGE, which stands for Advanced Glycation End Products. And we'll try and get into some other contributing factors and, you know, hopefully some natural interventions that we can leave you with that you can apply right away as soon as you leave this webinar. So just a quick background information on me again. Those of you who know me, you will know that I trained in Canada and practiced here for 10 years. And then I met and married my husband, who's South African, and so I call myself an honorary South African. Absolutely love South Africa. Practiced there for a number of years. I still maintain a part-time online practice at the moment out of KZN. And then I've had the privilege of working in other countries, Dubai, the Dominican Republic, and India. So Dr. Du Toit and myself, we consider ourselves unconventional doctors. Why? Because we are treating root cause pathologies, looking for the root cause, and it's very holistic. The approach looks at top to bottom, A to Z, mental, emotional, genetic, environmental factors. So we don't treat every ill with a pill. We're looking at things in a more comprehensive, holistic manner to help people resolve their health issues. All right. Moving on. So what I'm going to talk about a little bit today is a concept I did touch on last time, which is diabesity. And for some of you, this might be the first time you're hearing this term because it is a combination of two conditions, diabetes and obesity, and how many of the symptoms and the markers, biomarkers, the physiology, and so on overlap so much that this has now become the sort of broad spectrum term for anything related from very, very mild insulin resistance all the way to a full-blown picture of diabetes where you may have gotten to a point where you need insulin injections, right? It's a continuum, it's a spectrum, and there are other conditions that you may have heard of, such as metabolic syndrome, which is a cluster of symptoms from heart disease, high blood pressure, abnormal cholesterol levels, enlarged waist, you know, obesity, all of these things, pre-diabetes. And then we even have hormonal things that are starting to show up, such as polycystic ovarian syndrome and so on. But all of these conditions share the same underlying physiology in terms of their, if I can call it a dysfunction or a dysregulation, which is a metabolic dysfunction. So what we mean by that is that whatever our systems have built in to help us deal with whatever's coming into those systems, something has gone awry, something has gone out of whack. And so now it's like a symphony, an orchestra that is not nicely harmonized, okay? So when we look at the global impact, this is really, really interesting. And I think it really helps to put things into perspective. When we talk about diabetes in particular, at the moment, it could be a much larger number. These are people who've been diagnosed. So you have to remember there are many more people who don't even know that they could be approaching diabetes or already have it. More than 285 million people are affected worldwide. The projection is that by 2030, more than 380 million people will be affected. So in 10 years, we will be approaching a huge, exponentially huge number of people with diabetes and diabesity. In India, diabetes presents more risk of death than does infectious disease. In the Middle East, nearly 20 to 25% of the population is diabetic. It has been predicted that 60% of the world's diabetics will eventually come from Asia. And I don't have to mention the huge economic burden. You know, we as preventive medicine doctors believe that it is better for us to treat something now while it is going in the wrong direction than to have to wait until you have the diagnosis and have to then treat it, you know, with all of these medicines and hospitalizations and all of these things that cost the healthcare systems so much money. So I often get, you know, patients initially who might be a little bit skeptical who say, well, you know what, Dr. Luhar, I mean, it's really expensive to eat organic. It's really expensive to try to keep our health up with all of these natural medicines and supplements. Well, let's see how expensive it is if you're sick. How expensive would it be for yourself, for your family members and loved ones, and for society as a whole? This is just a little overview, you know, just a review on how insulin works. And so just for those of you who are joining us for the first time, insulin is a hormone that's released by the pancreas anytime you eat a carbohydrate. And so a carbohydrate could be anything from a cupcake or a cookie to rice, potatoes, bread, anything with sugar. And so the job of insulin, if you look at this little picture on the right here, is that it acts as a transporter. Once insulin docks into the insulin receptor on the cell, it opens up the channel that then allows the glucose to enter the cell to be able to do its job, and we use the glucose for fuel. But over time, when we're eating so many carbohydrates, we start to lose the sensitivity of the insulin. It becomes deaf. It's not really working as well, and so the pancreas is struggling to keep on releasing more and more and more insulin, but the glucose is not entering the cell. It's staying in the bloodstream. And then it just gets stored away as fat. That's sort of, in a nutshell, what happens. And this is how we end up with obesity. And it's basically a vicious cycle because all fat cells are endocrine cells on their own, and they're factories for inflammation as well. So what is a myth here is that if you're taking diabetic medications, oral hypoglycemic medications, and even insulin, that you're treating the disease. And I just want to highlight out there that initially it may help, but at the end of the day, methods that are used to lower blood sugar in terms of drugs generally make the problem worse because they're not actually treating the underlying issue, which is to sensitize the insulin and to help the cells to function better. So contrary to popular thinking, diabetes is a disease of too much, not too little insulin. And I'm talking here mostly about diabetes type 2. That's what we're focusing on. So it's really important to appreciate that insulin is the key driver here. And that's what we need to focus on, is insulin, not on the blood sugar so much. The blood sugar is a final manifestation that something has gone awry. Fasting insulin levels, which I encourage everyone to test, is the first indicator normally that there is dysregulation with respect to how the body is metabolizing glucose. Okay, so we do focus a lot on how insulin resistance is leading to diabetes because this is where the body is not able to use the glucose for fuel. And so this is, again, just, you know, a brief summary of some of the manifestations and consequences. So aging, of course, is a big one, right? Because this is all linking back to inflammation. Inflammation is driving this whole process because when we eat sugars, if we consider our body like a fire, or a house rather, that body, when there's lots of sugar inside the bloodstream, is like an ongoing fire. It's constantly on. And at some point we need to extinguish that fire. Otherwise, it's just the whole house is going to come crumbling down. Obviously, abdominal weight gain.
Oh, and I would say thank you for also mentioning the age at the beginning of your slides in terms of the advanced glycation end products. I think that's very well for people to understand. That's in fact the concept of how sugars actually cause inflammation and damage, and that is really the core of the process in terms of also the cardiovascular inflammation and damage to the blood vessels that we saw in that video that I showed.
Yes, absolutely. And so this is in reference to making your cells, your red blood cells, very sticky. And that is what actually is the beginning of the inflammation. Of course, Dr. Du Toit did a fantastic job of linking how this is related to cardiovascular issues and abnormal cholesterol. Remember, we need cholesterol. Cholesterol is the precursor to making all of our hormones. And it's important that we have good quality cholesterol. And then we're going to have circulation issues. So, you know, we're going to have issues that are going to lead us to not having enough circulation in certain parts of our body. This is also partly why we end up with the complications of amputations. But eye problems, erectile dysfunction, all related to insulin resistance. And then we've got hormonal implications. And it may be interesting for some of us out there to appreciate that actually the thyroid gland is also affected when you have severe insulin resistance, okay?
Yes.
And then there are others, gut issues. Of course, the gut is paramount with everything that we are doing to achieve good health. Brain, so we know that Alzheimer's is now called diabetes type 3 because of the link of insulin resistance, cancer, and of course, immune disturbances. So I just want to focus a little bit on this slide, which is about how inflammation is underlying all of these issues. And so anytime that we are having fat cells because the glucose is being shunted, you know, away from being able to be used in the system, then you get the insulin resistance. And so if you look at number one, your excess storing of fat, these adipose cells in of themselves are inflammation factories. So they release all kinds of what we call inflammatory cytokines constantly, right? And then they continue to grow. They start to release immune factors because the body is thinking, okay, we're under some kind of threat here. And it brings all kinds of immune cells to where these fat cells are. You end up with lots of inflammation and more insulin resistance. And then this is a vicious cycle that just keeps going on and on. So there's a well-known association between inflammation and diabetes. And the million-dollar question is, does diabesity cause inflammation, or does inflammation cause diabesity? And I think we can agree that it's a vicious cycle. Each leads to the other, which leads back to the first problem. So what is important here is, well, where is the inflammation coming from? What is creating the inflammation? Okay, so when we talk about obesity in particular, because we're creating excess fat, what has been studied quite a bit is that the stresses related to obesity, what the body undergoes in terms of stress when a person is starting to gain weight and become obese, is exactly the same as when that person has an infection. The body reacts to obesity in the same way it would to an infection, via inflammation. And that is why there is this recruitment of all of these inflammatory cells into the fat cells. And so the same intracellular and inflammatory stress pathways are activated in both obesity and in infection. And so going back to that million-dollar question, diabesity causes inflammation, which causes diabesity. There are other factors involved here. Leptin is another hormone. We end up with leptin resistance. So leptin is the hormone that is released when we've eaten enough food and it tells the body that we're full. We start to get blunted responses to leptin, which means we continue to eat because the brain hasn't sensed that we're actually full. And this further impairs glucose metabolism. And then the whole concept of these ages, which I think is really ironic that they're called ages because they actually lead to premature and accelerated aging. So anybody who has lots of wrinkles, deep wrinkles in their skin, anything related to aging, you might want to look at what's going on with their insulin resistance. Where are they on that spectrum? And so this is related to the cells becoming sticky because of lots of sugar intake. And again, ages are inflammatory. So if we're eating these kinds of foods, and I've got a couple of pictures there showing you these beautiful fast foods that everybody, you know, enjoys, and we are forgetting that if our diet is made up mostly of these foods, we are actually accelerating our own aging. And food is actually among the biggest contributors. So what's one of the things that is really critical here is the cooking method. If we are cooking foods at high temperatures, such as with grilling or frying or toasting, or what we South Africans love, which is braaiing, right?
Yes.
Barbecuing. This is what's also creating more and more of these ages. And our bodies have built-in mechanisms to counteract the ages, but it comes to a point where what we have inside is basically, we have reached a point where we can't keep up anymore. So we kind of outgrow the capacity. So You know, it might be a good.
One tip for the people that love braaiing or otherwise cooking at high temperatures. Of course, you don't want to, but if you must, use an oil that can handle high temperatures. Please don't use olive oil. For example, it can't handle this high temperature, it becomes very damaging. But something like macadamia oil and saturated fats, like just pure fats from the animal, or coconut oil, it can. You shouldn't, but at least it can handle the high temperatures without causing too much free radical damage for the food and your body.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so with the cooking methods, if it's possible, I would also maybe add the tip that perhaps pre-boil the meat a little bit first before you go ahead and braai, because then it's pre-cooked, and so you're decreasing the amount of ages that will be produced. So, you know, anything related to aging and accelerated aging, you need to look at the inflammatory sources from not just the foods we're eating, but also how we're making them. And so some of the best ways to counteract this is to use different cooking methods, such as poaching, steaming, stewing, boiling. I would even say lightly, very lightly, like a quick stir fry is not terrible. But the moment we are cooking for long periods at high temperatures, we are starting to introduce these age particles into our body.
Even breathing in these free radical fumes or smoke. And there's a lot of the test, you could say, the stories of the ladies that are also always preparing the food of the weekend or for a bazaar, and they're baking pancakes or they're frying food, and they start developing things like lung cancer. And this, unfortunately, anecdotally happens because even these fumes are dangerous to the lungs.
That's a great point. Yeah, you got to watch for that as well. And then, as I was saying, we have our built-in mechanism, which is our antioxidant capacity. And so because a lot of these ages create what we call oxidation, just like the video that you saw, which is a rusting effect, right? The cells begin to rust, the DNA starts to get damaged. And so antioxidants, which are anti-rusting compounds, help us to basically counteract that damage. So there are some beautiful antioxidants already available in foods. All of the dark colored, brightly colored vegetables and fruits are great. Of course, you got to make sure they're organic, pesticide free, non-GMO, all of those points that you made, Dr. Du Toit. And then if necessary, I know that I will place some of my patients on higher concentrations of some of these compounds like resveratrol, which comes from all the berries and blueberries, grapes and so on. Turmeric, the active compound there is curcumin. And by the way, turmeric has so many other wonderful anti-inflammatory properties. And it is also, interestingly, everything I've listed here, quercetin, green tea, vitamin C, are all of the compounds currently during this pandemic that are also showing a lot of promise for being immune boosting foods and compounds. So why not get, kill 2 or 3 or 4 birds with one stone, because you're eating all of these wonderful things. Turmeric is available in apples and other kinds of fruits. And then if anyone like me loves dark chocolate, I'm so glad to say that, dark chocolate is also high in antioxidants, but you just have to make sure you're getting a good quality, fair trade. The cacao must be a high content.
Yeah.
And for some people, it may taste bitter, but you just have to train your taste buds. And then another way to deal with the ages and to increase your antioxidant capacity, of course, is exercise and movement. And wherever possible, just being doing something that helps you to feel joyful and getting the body moving. I don't know if you want to add anything else about the ages.
Yes, no, it's very true about exercise. I tell people all the time, you must find something that you enjoy doing, because it won't be sustainable. For myself,
Right.
I mean, when people saw those pictures of me in my running career, that came at the end of being part of a running club and a few highly successful, even some ultra athletes that were training me to be successful. So I didn't come there because of myself, and you need to pull other people alongside with you. So if you think you like enjoying certain types of exercise, you ideally want to pull people alongside. Of course, there are restrictions now. Of course, the lockdown, so it's not the ideal world. But luckily, online, people are even connecting and exercising over streaming videos these days.
Absolutely.
And you need to put people alongside you and help you on that journey.
Absolutely. Those are all fantastic points. Just on the note of marathon runners and things like that, they actually require a big intake of antioxidants. I'm sure you would agree, because depending on the type of exercise that you're doing, it could be creating more oxidation. It could be creating higher stress hormone output. So, you know, like you said, not one size fits all. We all have to think about what we enjoy, what suits us best, what favors our genetics. All of those things are important. So let's talk a little bit more about other factors that contribute to inflammation. So again, I have indicated 4 different concepts here. They're all sort of, there's an interplay between all of them and inflammation. And so if we look at genes, we know now that in the, you know, study of epigenetics and nutrigenomics, these are how our genes express themselves in relation to the environment within which the gene resides. And that environment is going to be made up of the nutrients, the toxins, other hormones, other neurotransmitters, many different aspects that influence genes. And there are genes related to obesity that upregulate inflammation. There are genes that predispose to insulin resistance. And our genes are turned on and off depending on the environment. So your genes do not basically determine your destiny. You actually have a lot more control. And we are now able to do testing for what we call modifiable genetic factors to see what is the blueprint that you came into the world with, and how can you as the architect manipulate that so that you can be the best version of yourself. The second thing is your, go ahead.
I had my genetic test done by a laboratory that does the gene SNPs, especially relating to nutrigenomics. And one of the interesting findings is that if I consume the wrong types of fats, even some types of healthy saturated fats in too high quantities, it will actually lead to increasing my appetite. So even in terms of, you know, high fat diets, depending on your genetics, it might not actually achieve the results that you were looking for in the first place.
That's a really great point. And this is why I always caution people about, you know, just jumping on the bandwagon of doing a keto diet or a Banting or low carb, high fat. Although it would generally work in certain situations, and we know that it helps with insulin resistance, it helps with many factors related to diabetes. It's always a good idea to see if you have the genes that favor that. Because if you have genes that allow you to absorb fats faster, then these are diets that most probably will worsen your situation, okay? So when we talk about the digestive aspect of things, and Dr. Du Toit is very passionate about this, so I'm sure you can also chime in here, but I had talked about this quite a bit in our last session. And you can see that I've indicated the food pyramid there, which you're going to go into detail, I'm sure, next week.
Yes.
But I love this little image here because this cute little cartoon is starting to look like the pyramid based on what was at the bottom tier of the existing pyramid that we all grew up with. And now that whole food pyramid has had to basically be turned on its head because it is making people sicker and sicker, right? So what we need to look at is, are we consuming foods that are high in sugars? These would be called high glycemic foods. Are we eating foods that are inflammatory carbohydrates and even inflammatory fats? So very important that if you're consuming fats, that they're anti-inflammatory, such as your olive oil, coconut oil, you know, avocados, raw nuts and seeds, things like that. And keeping the inflammatory carbs at a very minimum. And then the idea that food is information. It's like getting an email in your inbox. If you open that email, it's a set of instructions. So you have to decide, what are the instructions you want to give your body, right? Is it to store fat? Is it to get sick? And I always tell my patients, you have to think before you're putting food in your mouth. Is this food feeding me, or is it feeding my disease, right? And then the idea of the microbiome. So the gut bacteria, which we spoke at length about previously, is so important because not only do they extract the nutrients, they function as our immune system. And when you have unhealthy gut bugs, they are releasing different kinds of metabolic byproducts, one of those things being something called LPS, lipopolysaccharide. And this leads to a condition called leaky gut, which many of you might have heard of. So the gut health is so important because we now know that those people who are obese, who are diabetic, who have heart disease, cancer, and all of these other very scary conditions have a completely different gut flora than their healthy counterparts. And so I'm just going to quickly mention the last two concepts before we give you some ideas on, well, what can you do about all of this? Toxins, we're exposed to them all the time. It's really hard to, in this day and age, prevent your exposure, but we really have to try hard. Drugs is one of the ways that we are bringing in more toxins into the body. Cleaning products, what we use to clean our homes with, what we use on our bodies, all of these things, we have to start looking at it from a different angle and using more green, eco-friendly, and obviously, human-friendly products. And then the pesticides, herbicides, GMO foods, anything that's been basically created in a lab that does not mimic what a real food would be. This is all very important. And then mitochondria. So those of you who might have remembered your biology class, mitochondria are in every cell. They are the powerhouse of creating all of the energy that the cells require in order to function. And there are lots of studies now showing that insulin resistance is very closely linked to the body's inability to have good functioning mitochondria. So the mitochondria start to create more of these oxidative oxygenation species, but they also help to counteract them. But we lose the ability to do that as we become more and more insulin resistant. Mitochondria are plentiful in your skeletal muscles, so in all of your muscles. And usually people who are starting to go down the insulin resistance path start to lose the amount of mitochondria in their muscles. And then you start to get defective lipid or cholesterol metabolism. So those are the 4 areas that, if you look on this slide, are all overlapping, are all working, in concert with each other, and are driving the inflammation and the inflammatory process even more. So I have mentioned some of these things.
Just had a thought. If people are going on this journey, they might find that a big part of it, of course, is losing weight, burning fat. And we store our toxins in our fat cells. So one of the things that I would recommend to anyone that's considering this journey is to come see a naturopath, because we are trying to know and effectively help you into a effective detox program, a detoxification method, because you need to balance this process of weight loss and detoxification, because otherwise you can do yourself a lot of harm when these toxins are released from the fat stores and they start to attack the organs, because unfortunately these toxins are also, they act like almost like free radicals, damaging the cells and tissue as they're passing out through the body.
Absolutely, very good point. And so of course, we are both passionate about empowering people to take charge of their health, and we're passionate about sharing information and educating, but we are also very passionate about helping people one-on-one so that they get the customized attention. And these are just general guidelines, what we're providing today. If you are truly interested in your own individual healthcare, then it is best to seek out a naturopathic doctor or a functional medicine doctor, somebody who knows how to look at your health holistically. So on the right side, if we look at, between gut health and toxins and inflammation and genes and all of this, we're looking at diet. So how do we counteract this? Well, we want to have as much of an anti-inflammatory diet as possible, where we can start to put out those fires. We want to extinguish those fires. And one of the best ways to do this is to eliminate wheat, eliminate sugars, all of the white foods. We say white rice, white flour, white sugar, white bread. This would be critical, and it's usually the hardest thing for people to do. So if you are inclined to, see how your health would change, this is one of the things that I think would be the most effective, And then we spoke a lot about different kinds of diet, the high fat or healthy fat, low carb, the keto diet, specific carbohydrate diet, Mediterranean diet. So it all depends, again, on each individual, what's best suited to them, taking into consideration their genes and other factors. Of course, focus on organic foods, non-GMO, and very low in ages, right? Then if we look at the next image, if we just go counterclockwise, I have indicated here the importance of testing, because we don't give the same protocol to each person. Who we could have 10 people coming to see us for something related to diabetes, and each of them is going to leave with a completely different protocol. And how do we achieve this? We have to know what's going on a cellular, on a physiological level. So we spoke a lot last time about the different kinds of testing. Please refer back to that video on YouTube because it's got some important information, and in particular to help you understand where you are on that index of insulin resistance. Then DNA tests to help you understand susceptibilities that you might have inherited and how you can manipulate your lifestyle and your diet in favor of your genes, not against your genes. Food intolerance test is another thing that I do suggest for many patients because it helps them to understand right away what their immune system is reacting against. And then, of course, we do tests, lots of different functional medicine tests to determine what kinds of deficiencies do you have, what kinds of nutrient could you require more of. So I do recommend all of that. And there are many others. I'm sure, Dr. Du Toit, you're probably thinking of others as well. But I think that's a good place to start, for more holistic, because they're all looking at very different aspects of your health.
And I do mention to people, just as a side note, that I replace a lot of these with iridology. By looking at the iris, you can in fact see the genetics, your DNA, your food intolerances, your nutrient deficiencies and toxins. They're all on the iris. And then
Fantastic.
I confirm with blood tests or other tests afterwards. But the iris gives all that information. I've been practicing.
That's really fascinating.
For 7 years, yeah.
Yes, so that's really fascinating. I think I'll have you check my irises sometime as well. So yes, that's great. So there are lots of naturopathic doctors who do iridology. I am not one of them just because my training was a little bit different, but I think there's so much value in that. And it's great to know that you use it quite a bit. So moving on to the next corner, there are going to be many individuals who are so far into the chronic disease that just looking at diet and lifestyle might not be enough. Now, it can be. You have to do all the hard work. You have to really be committed. And you certainly could get the same results like your dad did. Certainly, right? But in certain situations, we may need to prescribe certain natural medicines at high concentration so that you can get a really good therapeutic benefit sooner. And so those would be the things I mentioned previously: curcumin, resveratrol, antioxidants, omega-3s, coenzyme Q10, which is, by the way, omega-3 and coenzyme Q10 are also not only anti-inflammatory, but they're implicated in your mitochondrial health. They are really important for helping your mitochondria. If any of you remember the electron transport chain and all of that biochemistry that we learned about how the body produces ATP, which is the energy that the cells need, these are some of the compounds that are critical for that. And then quercetin, which again is a powerful antioxidant. And so you need to see a doctor to know which of these, and there are many others, I've just highlighted a few, because these are all related to your ages, to inflammation, to antioxidants. And so you need to see a person who will know what dosages you should be taking based on your physiology, okay? And then, of course, genetics, we spoke a lot about looking at the impact of how genes express themselves based on what's around them. And one of the things in terms of eating behaviors is intermittent fasting, where we know that we also have genes that respond. These are our longevity genes. When we give the body a break and we're not eating for so many hours, it allows for a process called autophagy, or cleaning up house. And that's really important in terms of revving up how your genes express themselves, as is sleep, as is how you manage stress levels, as is how much exercise and what type of exercise you're doing. So you can see that there's quite a bit that we need to look at. It's not as simple as saying, here's a prescription for a drug, see you later. It's not like that, right? We are looking at different aspects that are linked to your health, not just today, but for the future as well. So this is the quote I couldn't remember last time, and I finally found it. So what I wanted to highlight here is that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And clear evidence from the scientific literature shows us that diabetes is absolutely reversible, especially if it's caught in its earlier stages. And if we use an aggressive approach with diet, with movement, with all of the things we've spoken about today as natural interventions, you can absolutely reverse the course of this condition.
And it's so important for people to understand their priorities. Like we mentioned, in terms of they might not want to spend a lot of money on healthy food, but they might end up later in life having to go through expensive medical treatments, sometimes life-saving medical treatments. So
Right.
people need to prioritize their health as number one. And then these small changes, prevention, would really lead into tremendous health outcomes.
Absolutely. So yes, I hope that was, you know, eye-opening for some of us who might not realize that so many different aspects are related to whether your body is activating and turning on health, or whether it is activating and turning on disease.
Definitely true. Yes. And I realized now, just a little bit maybe late, I didn't put up my contact details quite yet. So people are welcome to look up there where they can get hold of me online. One of the things we're both mentioning is that, of course, being in lockdown, you shouldn't end your journey to health. And we can still offer online consultations. We've been doing that for many years. And so do reach out to us if you need any help, or otherwise nutritional dietary support especially. We can even still refer for these tests and services for over distance. And people are surprised about the benefits of online consultations. South Africa is it's a new concept for many of them. But I do refer people to my Facebook page to go look at the reviews and recommendations. There are people that have had online consultations. It's been a wonderful journey for them. So it doesn't need to be scary. Dr. Luhar, I think your patients have embraced this really well because of the journey you've walked with them. For me, it's still
Yes.
a bit of a road of let's just get a bit more comfortable with these concepts.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, it's interesting, you know, because more and more people, I believe, are starting to embrace this way of looking at health and trying to resolve their health concerns, which is fantastic. And I just want to point out that, you know, obviously we've come to the end of our webinar, and we're so thankful that everybody who showed up and stayed with us. And we didn't get a chance to answer any questions, but I think we will discuss maybe if you can send us private messages on your questions, we'd be happy to answer those for next time, I'm sure, Dr. Du Toit. And also next week, same channel, same time, we're going to be talking about sort of the mental and emotional health aspects related to everything going on with diabetes and the current climates of this COVID-19, looking at some of what's going on, why are people who have been afflicted with these conditions having poorer outcomes, and then I'm sure you're going to go a little bit deeper into, you know, food-wise, what can we do to help ourselves be at our best.
Yes, I'm really looking forward to sharing people the top guidelines in terms of how to make healthy food choices and avoid unhealthy ones. It's really a checklist of things that we should be aware of. And even in terms of the healthy food pyramid, you would be surprised how difficult it is to find and design a holistic health pyramid that's based on naturopathic principles in terms of the scope of what we're discussing. So I think everyone would really enjoy, especially that part. And yes, and delving into the mind and the emotions in terms of diet, and especially this topic about blood sugar, you'll find that the brain has got so much influences in terms of how it will respond negatively to sugar, even in terms of stress, hormones. And I mentioned to people, one of the most important things is your mindset. It's more important than anything else, because you can have access to the best diet, the best information, the best knowledge, but if it doesn't transition to action, actively deciding to prioritize your health, for example, the knowledge doesn't mean anything. So we must adopt this mindset of being proactive, be preventative in our health, and embrace what we can in this environment, and being at peace with what we have. Even as stressful as it might be to be in lockdown, there's a lot of things to be thankful for. So I just wanted to share that with everyone, do a bit of an intro to next week's discussion for sure.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Have a fantastic rest of your weekend.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend. Till next week.